Mm, it's good. Good morning. I'm drinking a cup of coffee from Prismatic Coffee Roasters in Salem, Oregon. They're one of our newest supporters and sponsors. And their packaging, in a nice stroke of luck, is made and produced by Roastar Coffee Packaging, the show's presenting sponsor. It's nice when things work out like that. And also, the coffee is good.
Yeah, of course. My name is Isabella. I work for Royal Coffee, a coffee importer based in Emeryville, California, which is in the Bay Area. My title is Lab and QC Specialist. I've been in coffee for 6 years now. I was born and raised in Florida, and I started off my coffee career there. I started as a barista, did some R&D for the company, and then moved out to the Bay and managed a few cafes in the city, and then moved on to Royal. My role changes quite a lot. I get to do research, like what we're talking about today. I get to do some QC as well, and teach classes and develop curriculum and things like that. And my background, my degree is in biomedical sciences. So that's kind of where projects like these come together, is this interest in science and the desire to merge it with coffee.
Well, what I reached out to you about to talk about is this article I read in Roast Magazine, issue 133, January, February 2026, if anyone's looking for it. We'll link to it as well. It's called Is Frozen the New Fresh? Exploring the Effects of Freezing on Roasted Coffee. And it's about a study you did testing, the effects of freezing your coffee, your roasted coffee, on taste. And I was going to ask what got you into like the sciencey aspect of it, because when I read it as just a person out in the world, I was kind of surprised at how serious the science part of it was, like the process and going through the methodology, which I'm hoping to chat about. But I related right away. The kind of the first introduction in the article is a conversation about one of your first coffee experiences that got you started with your grandmother, I believe. Would you mind kind of relaying, what some of those early coffee memories were that maybe sparked something in you later in life?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my grandmother, I don't know, just going back to my grandmother's place, she lives in rural Florida, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And going there and seeing her Folgers coffee inside of her freezer, and her, kind of saying that, just makes the coffee taste better. And you don't really think much of it as a kid. You obviously haven't tasted coffee. You don't really think about that. And then getting older, when I first started drinking coffee when I was like in middle school, and it's kind of a weird story because they switched the times of when the school started. They were trying it out and seeing how it was. So school started out at 7:30, I believe, and I was the first bus stop. And so I think it got there at 5, maybe goodness. Like 5:40 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so my parents obviously did not let me do that. And so I would sneak drinking coffee early in the morning. And I would always get caught because my mom could feel that the coffee machine was still warm by the time she took it out to get ready for work. And so, we evolved from Folgers to Dunkin' Donuts, and then started working in specialty coffee. And it just kind of elevates in terms of, how seriously people take it, and flavor and taste and, methodology too. And I kind of relay this imagery of, sitting in a coffee shop with, floor to ceiling windows and birch tables. And, I don't know, there's a very like kind of minimalist aesthetic to that age. And there was definitely a snobbiness that kind of associated with that. And
what? No.
Surprise, surprise. Um, and definitely getting into specialty coffee, you're like, I was like, my grandma freezing coffee, that's ridiculous. Of course, that doesn't do anything. And so, we kind of elevate ourselves into this, snobby world. And then we're kind of going back down a bit in terms of, I do a lot of teaching now and people ask a lot of questions and really earnest questions. And so one of those questions was, should I freeze roasted coffee or freeze my coffee to make it last longer? And I always said, I was just hard because I didn't know the answer to it. I assumed that the answer was no, it didn't do anything. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
That was just a rug that fell. But I assumed that it didn't do anything to the coffee, but for no real reason. I didn't have any actual evidence behind it, and so that's what really, inspired this sort of exploration of this topic, and how my background and how my first experiences with coffee really informed this particular set of research that we did.
I think that was definitely, and I don't want to stereotype a generation, but generationally, like my dad has coffee in the freezer, and just yesterday I have a new neighbor. He's 78 years old. His name is George. Shout out George. And he said, "Oh, you're a coffee person," because he saw a sticker on my car. And he's like, "I don't actually drink coffee anymore because it keeps him up, or, whatever it might be." But he said, "I have a bag in the freezer I should give you." And it definitely feels like it was from an era that was just a thing that people did. And the idea of freezing to save it, preserve it, was a concept. You have students, coffee students, asking questions, and one of them is about the freezing. At what point does that become just a conversation that you don't quite have the answer to, but you're kind of putting out there like, no, probably not a good idea? Do you say, you know what, I actually need to find this out for myself? And how did you go about getting that started and figuring or planning a science project? I would have no idea how to start.
Yeah. I think it mostly just we got the question so much that it annoyed me that I didn't have a firm answer for it.
Yeah.
And there was no research really. Even in the kind of weird, or not weird, but kind of the deep web of, people putting out their random research, on their blog that they've, there really wasn't much of that either. And so
I used to work in a coffee shop where customers would bring their own TDS monitors. So there's definitely like a world where this would have been something somebody explored, and to not be able to find it online is surprising.
Yeah. I mean, and I think I found maybe one or two, but it just wasn't fleshed out enough that there was really some hard evidence. And so I took the question to my boss, who is Chris Kornman. He's the director of education here. And he's so great. He's always willing to explore, different topics, and very supportive in that. And so we kind of drew up a plan about, what research might look like, what is the best way to go about this, especially because it was coming from a consumer. We wanted to answer it for the consumer. And yeah, we basically went about creating, research to the best of our capabilities. We don't have a huge team here. We have maybe 3 cupping people that we use for cupping on these types of projects, and that can be here regularly. But we do have access to a lot of different coffee. And so, that's what one thing I was really excited about this project was that we had a coffee from the same exact farm, but 2 different processing methods. So yeah, that's kind of how we got started with that. Brainstorming and
sure,
figuring out what we can do within our means.
For someone listening who hasn't read this article yet, I'm assuming they will, because they'll be so excited about our conversation. Can you describe how do you describe the study? What is it? What is it that you're examining? And then, what was your methodology to get to your to try to conclude a result of some sort?
Yeah. So the research, or the question that we explored, was, does freezing make quality how does it impact quality? Does it improve it? Does it, diminish quality? And how we went about designing this experiment is we have two different coffees. We have a washed and a natural coffee from Peru, from this farm called Finca Tosta. And we did one big batch of coffee. We roasted maybe 30 pounds or so total, and we did it all on the same day. And so from there, what we were trying to determine is, does our control, a one-way valve, taste better or worse than our two variables, which is two frozen coffees. So we have a frozen Ziploc, or frozen one-way valve, and then a frozen vacuum-sealed coffee. So we're comparing two frozen samples against one control. We roast it all in one day, and so we package them. And then we taste them. We taste them a week out, 2 weeks out, 3, 4. And then after 4 weeks, we started doing a month after, every month after. So 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And I think we did about 6 or 7 months total. We just did it until we ran out of coffee. And from there, so at each tasting, so how we evaluated quality in this instance was using the CVA. And this was kind of one of the first or second iterations of the CVA. And we really like it for this type of data research because it's a check all that apply. And so instead of, as we're doing research or writing down notes that we're experiencing, I might say orange, another person might say grapefruit, but what we both mean is that we're tasting acidity in the coffee, but we can't observe any trends between having these two terms. And so that's why we really liked the check all but apply. So we did that evaluation, and then we also did a triangulation as well for each time that we tasted it. So we did we compared the control against the two variables, and we did that 2 times for each one. So we had 6 sets of triangulations to do. And so we were never comparing a frozen vacuum sealed to a frozen one-way valve. It was always against the room temperature coffee, because we didn't care if the one frozen was tasting better than the other. We wanted to know if it tasted better at room temperature or not.
Sure. And then I am assuming, but I shouldn't do that in science. Although assumptions are kind of the beginning, it's just the results that are the important part. The tasting team was the same each time, right?
Yeah.
So you weren't bringing in outsiders who may have a different perspective. And I ask that because sometimes when I go into a cupping or judging something, which no one should ever let me judge anything, I'm definitely not an expert in that way, but there's a language to the cupping and to the tasting. You mentioned the CVA that you all have to have together. And I think even with an experiment like this over the long term, I would imagine your group developed kind of some shorthand or expectation going into the next one because you had been doing it together. Is that something that makes sense to you?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a possibility of that. We did do everything double blind, so nobody knew what we were tasting as we were tasting it between the 3 of us. So I will say that that's the way that we tried to avoid that. And we would discuss afterwards, but I think that especially after the 4-week mark, there's a month in between and you kind of just forget about it in between. But I think there's definitely a possibility of that. And we used the 3 people that we have because we did so many cuppings and we just couldn't get, if we had one person come in, we felt that would just skew the data rather than adding to the results.
What was the most challenging variable to control for? Or was there one that became a variable you weren't kind of expecting to adjust for?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing that we had some trouble with was that after about the 3 or 4 month mark, the coffees would auto break that were frozen if they weren't at high enough temperatures. And so in the triangulations, there were at some points where you could assume that one coffee was the other. But once we upped the temperature of it, that we didn't have a problem with it. Another question that people have for this research is taking the frozen coffee out of the freezer. They asked, do we grind it immediately? And how does that impact flavor? And we said, yes, that we grind it immediately. And that if anything, there has been research to show that doing it right out of the freezer / when there's a little bit moisture on the coffee actually contributes to more even grind particle sizes. And so that would make the extraction a little bit better, if anything. So that was, one question that we had. And it was a variable that we personally weren't concerned about. And for the entire experiment too, is everything was individually bagged for each cupping and evaluation session. So we were never opening and closing bags. So we didn't have that variable to worry about.
Sure. I think there was like a trendy thing over the last couple of years of people keeping a little squirt bottle near their grinder so they could spray down their grinds,
so funny,
their beans before. Yeah, I think it was like a Instagram or TikTok thing, or one of the
that doesn't surprise me.
To spray your beans before you. And I think even my mother-in-law said that about reducing static, like spray a little water or something, because we were having a lot of static issues. So then you did this over the long haul. I mean, it's a long time to commit to anything for 6-7 months, especially something where you kind of want to say, hey, guess what? This is what happened. But what were the results at the end of that and end of that time period?
Yeah, the biggest results that we saw through the experiment was that so we separated the cuppings into the first 5 and the last 5 in terms of evaluating the sessions. And after the first 5 sessions, which is probably a month off, we had a really high increase in our ability to tell the difference between the control and the frozen variables. And the first 5, we probably hit an average of 60 to 70%, if I'm remembering correctly. And then after that 5-week period, we shot up to 100%, 80% very continuously throughout the rest. So we would say, one of the results would be that, after a month off, if you're going to wait about a month off before consuming fully your coffee, it might benefit you to freeze your coffee. And then another result that we had too was that the most obvious trend that we saw in terms of the CVA form that we used was the decrease in sweetness as a way to identify quality. And, obviously there's different types of sweetness in a natural versus a washed coffee, but we did find that was a big component there. And then, I would say that's the biggest thing, was that the sweetness and the intensity of flavors diminished. And then there was
diminished across the board, or specifically with freezing, just so I'm understanding
that. With the diminished in the control, actually.
Oh, okay.
So over time, those things would diminish in the control, and we could tell that, the variables were a little bit higher in quality because they retained that sweetness and the flavors. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it sits out on the counter for a couple of months, you're going to lose that brightness and that moment, that you have with a really good cup of coffee. Right.
Definitely.
So who should care about this? And or who could use this information to affect their life? I think most people, outside of the coffee industry, which sometimes it's hard to remember that there are people that are outside of that, they might go and buy a bag of coffee and then drink it, and realistically probably drink it in 4 to 6 weeks, if not sooner. So who is the person that's going to see this and be like, oh, I'm going to change my, my methodology at home? Or, who do you think is taking this information in and applying it to their life?
Yeah. I think that someone who's buying, high quality lots that want to taste them at another time, I think that, freezing coffee will definitely preserve the flavor. I think that it's funny because my parents, I brought them coffee a couple years ago, 3 years ago, probably now, from my work. And I just visited a month ago and the coffee was still there. Like they just had not touched it at all. And so I feel like I wonder about, the older generation, how quickly they actually consume coffee. And I do think that freezing would be beneficial for them. And yeah, whole beans, I would recommend, keeping them whole beans in the freezer and not ground. And I think based on other research that we've done as well, we've noticed that the higher quality the coffee, the more there is to lose. So it'll diminish at higher rates than a lower quality coffee. So I'd say if you're interested in quality, if you're interested, if you're going on a trip or something, or you're buying too many beans and want to switch out or something like that, I think that would be relevant. I don't know.
That's actually leads me to a second question. If we're looking at the industry specific person, let's say I'm a roaster and I'm buying green beans and roasting them, and all of a sudden there's a change in business, or I end up having more than I have. Does this extrapolate, do you think? Like, I'm assuming the samples you were freezing were relatively small, even though you had, 30 pounds of them. What if it was like a whole bag? I mean, in theory, could somebody roast, a bag or two and just throw them in the freezer and then pop them out to try to change their workflow in their roastery? Like if I'm running a small roastery or something, is that theoretically it makes sense, or does it, I'm trying to think of the different types of businesses that some coffee businesses are going to be super focused on fresh, hitting all the right windows, but some are like, hey, we're taking on a lot of chores.
Yeah.
In addition to this, could we cut down and only do like 1 or 2 roast days and then freeze that coffee, for a period of time? Do you think that is something that people could do?
Based on our research, I would say no, because I think once after it's frozen and it goes down to room temperature, I think there will be a bigger loss in flavor because the change in moisture, but that is just an assumption. There's obviously no research to back it. It's funny because I feel like I often see coffee research, published in peer-reviewed journals and things like that. And my issue with it is it doesn't feel compatible with the industry. Like it really is frustrating for me that all of this money is going into it, and there just feels like a gap between the knowledge, the scientific knowledge, and the industry knowledge. My comment to that in regards to this is this was a consumer question. And so the research is focused on the consumer. And so I don't really know if it's 100% applicable to, someone running a business, to be perfectly honest. I think that in terms of, I think a roaster could provide recommendations now for their consumers based on this, whether it's a little note on their bag or things like that. But I don't know if it would work at a larger scale, especially because, we think about freezing costs too. It's like you're buying a freezer, what is the cost of that? Is that really going to outweigh whatever workload someone has that they're, say they're missing out or they're lowering down by freezing coffee? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That wording?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. There's all kinds of variables that I didn't think about before I asked the question. Hey, good morning. Just want to remind you to check out our new merch at coffeepeoplearesexy.com. Thanks for checking in. And so that's kind of a fun thing, is like when you do have the ability and the time to do a study, is coming, like seeing, like as you go, like, oh, this is a variable I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Or this question has led me to a new question, which leads me to a new question, and every answer leads to a new question. Mm-hmm. That can also be frustrating, but it's kind of fun too.
Definitely.
I'm wondering, since we have you here and it's the first time you've been on the show, I always ask people in the industry if they have a piece of advice that maybe that they apply to their life or that they heard at some point that meant something to them. I'm wondering if there's anything you could share with the audience that you just think is valuable advice about coffee or not.
I think working at Royal specifically has given me a broader insight to the industry and how there are so many cornerstones of there's real people behind every single point of the process. And I think part of what has, I guess humbled me, I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe grounded is a better term to use, are the people behind the coffee, behind the growing, and the dynamic of a buyer origin versus a coffee growing origin. I feel like that, power dynamic has really grounded me in a lot of different ways about how I ask questions or how I inquire or, how I listen to other people's questions too. I guess that's not quite exactly a piece of advice, but I think that I don't know. I think we can just get so in our heads, and I think it can get very snobby. And I think the desire to like do better and, create really excellent coffee can go a little bit too far. And so I guess just being mindful of that.
Well, yeah. I think to your point about snobbiness or, pretension in coffee, I've been seeing a lot of articles lately about, not about that specifically, although it seems to dance around that, but about the idea that people are fatigued a little bit by the overwhelm. Like the stories of sustainability aren't hitting in the same way. Great, there's a new brewer that I'm supposed to try out or explore, but it's just one more piece of equipment, And as someone who recently moved, as I was unloading boxes, I was like, why do I have 6 French presses? Yeah. I don't need, that many.
Yeah.
And then I was able to justify in my head all the different scenarios I would need more French presses. So I haven't gotten rid of any yet.
You're camping, you're giving it to a friend,
Right. But I wonder if there's maybe a little, and this is just an observation, but a little bit of a contraction in the consumer side, even industry consumers on, maybe this should be a little bit easier. Maybe this shouldn't be something I stress about. And I think that maybe that's where I'm going with this, because sometimes I just go off on a tangent. I think there's always a phase when you get really into something where you get really excited and you get really stressed and you're like, I got to do this perfectly, or I got to do it this way, or I've got to try this new thing. And maybe we're seeing industry wide a little bit of let's just take a breath. Everything is demanding so much bandwidth from our brains right now.
Absolutely.
Coffee can be that thing that is, the come down in a weird way. But, I don't know if you guys are seeing that at Royal, where you're engaged with all kinds of, are people cutting back on the risk taking of coffee, coffee buying in particular. And that may be not a fair question to ask you, but it's just something I was popped into my head.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in terms of green coffee, I would say no. I think people are more excited than ever about taking risks or trying experimental coffee. But I mean, Royal is still such a small little window in terms of the industry that obviously is not representative of the entire industry. But I definitely see that too. Like, I mean, even were you at, I keep on wanting to say Expo, but it's
That's
World
fine.
of Coffee.
Yes, I was there. Yeah.
But it felt so much smaller this year. And part of that is because of, the people are scared to come to the US and probably not getting their visas approved anyway. And I wonder if that is a part of the contraction. And obviously I feel like I'm going on a tangent right now, but
no, it was a weird thing because I couldn't tell while I was at, I call it WOC. I don't say World of Coffee. It's too long, although I just said it. I wasn't sure if it was a bigger space than say Houston or Chicago before. And it just felt less busy or if it really was less busy.
Yeah.
And it was, I'm not sure if I'm sure they've put out a number somewhere. I haven't seen it yet, but it did feel, I don't want to say diminishing returns, but it did feel like, for me at least, even though I had a lot more engagement this time around and was more involved in hosting events and that sort of thing, the audience that I was engaging with felt smaller because a lot of them were recognizable.
Yeah.
People that you see at a lot of different events or you've seen at these over the years. It didn't seem like as many new members were coming in with new ideas as opposed to more established faces. And maybe that was part of it. Now, that being said, it's 3 days and thousands of people. And obviously I didn't engage with everyone as much as I tried to.
Yeah. You can get a general sense of the vibe though. But I definitely could see, going back to your question, I definitely can see where there are some people or some areas in coffee contracting. It's funny because in SF, I feel like there are actually so many high-end coffee shops popping up in a way that wasn't here 4 years ago when I first moved here. And so there is a lot more excitement in SF, particularly or specifically. But I don't know about I feel like as the industry as a whole, I could see it in a little bit more of a,
when people talk about things like fourth wave or different things that are happening, I just kind of think of it more as we definitely had an era of really exploring. Craft beer did this too. I had to try every new thing.
Yeah.
And I think it may just be as a group goes into a new field and they start doing that. And then it starts to come back around to, okay, the coffee is important. We've established that. The origin's important. We're establishing that. We got to get back to remembering the experience of why that moment with your grandmother, or, for me, it's sitting on the porch in the morning, no phone, just drinking a cup of coffee, listening to the birds or whatever with the dog, remembering that is also part of this experience just as much as flavor is.
Definitely.
And I think that's where I am. And I maybe reflect that into what I'm seeing out in the world. Do you guys have do you have an idea for another experiment or an expansion, or what's coming next for you?
Yeah. Right now we're working on a project that is focused on coffee perception, which is a notoriously very difficult thing to wrangle and run research on, even for people in very rigorous academia. But I think that Chris and we are just working on a project exploring that, which I'm really excited about. And there's so much history with, CQI and SCA, there's so many things to uncover, and we want to focus on every side of, industry, what is the research? What are practical examples that you could do at home to explore or, expand your own palate? And so that's one of the bigger projects we're working on. We're not doing any freezing anytime soon, but we are always welcome to suggestions. We do love running projects like this, and we're always curious about what people want to know more about. So, yeah.
And I believe that when you do projects, I know this one was the article was in Roast Magazine, but you also publish a lot of things on the royalcoffee.com blog.
Yes.
As well. If people want to go in and see other things you guys have done, we'll make sure we share that link. I've been to the Royal Lab and had a few coffees there on my way through town. I'm wondering if you're out and about traveling to something like World of Coffee, formerly known as Expo, but you stop at a coffee shop on the way. What is it that you order?
Yeah. I feel like I'm very much a cortado girl. I feel like it says a lot, it's always a good drink, and I'm definitely always getting multiple beverages, whether it's probably a drip and a cortado, but if I'm really interested in, a sweet specialty drink, I'll get that and share it with whoever I'm with. And
that's the best. I love going out for coffee with my wife, because she's going to always order something I would probably not.
Yeah.
But I still get to taste it. And that's my favorite thing.
Yeah. I just want to sip,
Yeah. And it's rude to ask a barista for just a sip of something, I feel like.
Yes.
But you never know. Did I miss anything about this particular thing or anything else that you wanted to share today with anyone?
No, I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Well, thank you. When I read that article, it really spoke to me, and I apologize to Connie and the team over there at Roast Magazine. I don't read every article because the magazines start piling up, and then you get, you drink a little too much at Thanksgiving, and you have a subscription to like the New Yorker and Dwell and Roast and Barista, and you're like, how do I get through all this every month?
Yeah.
But that was one that kind of stuck out to me and made me feel some things, because I have so many people in my life who have said, oh, here's some coffee from the freezer, or, oh, I freeze it. Someone I know very close to me freezes their Keurig pods. Couldn't tell you why.
Yeah.
But they do. So I thought it was really interesting, and I'm glad there's somebody out there, smarter than me in the art of science that is exploring the reasons why. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Hopefully that was relatively easy for you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was very chill. You're great at asking questions, very seamless.
Oh, thank you. That's nice of you to say. I'm going to keep that in the show. I am also going to hit the stop button here.